Shabbat or whatever day you are watching this message. We are glad that you are hanging with us. We are finishing a series today called Living Wisely, a series on the book of Proverbs, and each week we've looked at a different aspect of living wisely. So today we're going to talk about living wisely with friends. Human beings were not created to be alone or to live life alone. God created us for community and fellowship with others, and there is nothing in this world like a real friend. Friendship is defined this way: a state of enduring affection, esteem, intimacy, and trust between two people. And friendship is key to living wisely in this world. Who you surround yourself with determines a lot of things in your life. If you spend time with people who give you life, you will be satisfied. If you spend time with people who drain your life, you will be dissatisfied. It's so important to surround yourself with people who make you better, people who build your character, people who show you how to love others, people that are better than you at something that you are trying to improve in, people who can speak into your life, who can encourage you and correct you, teach you, and help you be the best version of yourself. Probably the most well-known verse in the Bible on friendship is Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 17. As iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens the countenance of his friends. Now, if you're like me, you think of two swords sharpening each other, or like the Japanese chef doing the thing with the knives clanging together, but it's not how sharpening actually works now or in the days of Solomon. It would not be two pieces of metal that are the same that sharpen each other. It's one is like a sword, and the other is sharpened by another tool, like a hammer or a file, which is also made of iron. It needs to have a different type of edge and texture to sharpen a sword or a knife. And of course, the metaphor of this proverb isn't trying to connect us to the art of blacksmithing. It's a reminder, it's a metaphor. When it comes to swords, sharp is better than dull. And in the same sense, friends, real friends who love God and love you, are crucial to your sharpness. In real, meaningful friendship, there are different seasons where you are sharpened by friends and other times where you do the sharpening. So you have to look at the rest of the verse, not just as iron sharpens iron, but as iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens the countenance of his friend. Or the Jewish Study Bible, JPS Study Bible, says it this way. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the wit of his friend. In a footnote in the JPS Study Bible, it says it means that good conversation sharpens the wit. Good, godly, meaningful, vulnerable conversation with friends makes your life better in both good and bad seasons, on good and bad situations. The dilemma for so many is this phrase, iron sharpens iron, is often misused or in some cases used as abuse or a tool of abuse for people. I was in a meeting once with other leaders, and I was yelled at for sharing my opinion, which is weird because I was asked my opinion. And afterwards, another leader came up to me and said, well, iron sharpens iron, Matt. Sometimes we all need to be put in our place. Okay, first of all, pump the brakes. Yelling at somebody, a peer especially, is not iron sharpening iron. Correcting someone doesn't count as iron sharpening iron if you belittle the person and cut someone down. Hurtful, manipulative conversation dulls the wit of a friend. And in fact, people who treat you that way may call themselves a friend, but they are not acting like a friend. And neither are you if you misuse the phrase. If you've ever experienced the misuse of iron sharpens iron, that phrase, can I just say to you that I'm sorry that happened to you? It's very painful, and it's okay to acknowledge the pain. You don't have to live there, but you do have to acknowledge the pain and grieve what that moment cost you so that you can let it go and move on with your life. And so you can make sure make a decision to not treat other people that way. Look, it's so important. As I already said, it's so important to surround yourself with people who make you better, people who build your character, people who show you how to love other people, people who are better than you at something that you're trying to improve in, people who can speak into your life, encourage you, correct you, teach you, and help you be the best version of yourself. Proverbs 27 and verse 9 says, as ointment and perfume gladden the heart, so the sweetness of one's friend comes from his sincere counsel. Now, this doesn't mean that everything a friend says is pleasant, but it does mean that the heart behind what is said is to sharpen, to make better, to make more useful, and good friends do just that. Much like correction, which we talked about last week, and words, which we talked about a few weeks before. This phrase, sincere counsel, is important because being sincere means you say what you genuinely feel or believe. You're not dishonest or hypocritical. When you give sincere counsel, you're saying what you genuinely feel and believe, not just what the person wants to hear, and you're not dishonest or hypocritical. You want and need friends who speak truth to you in love. So verse 5 of the same chapter says it like this: better is open rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but excessive the kisses of an enemy. I mean, being corrected hurts. And knowing that someone is trying to help you be the best version of yourself and will speak the truth to you is far better than it coming from people who are intentionally trying to wound you. Remember, we talked about it last week, this quote from Brennan Manning in The Importance of Foolishness. He says, there is no limit to the defenses we contrive against the inbreak of truth into our lives. People who have real friendships allow people into their lives who can help break through our defenses and help us deal with the things that we are afraid to deal with and believe the things that are hard to believe about ourselves and about God. Here are, I think, what real friends actually do. It's not a complete list, but it's some of the things that I think friends are actually supposed to do. You know, friends are supposed to accept you for who you are. Friends listen to you without judgment. Friends encourage you to grow in the knowledge of yourself and of the Lord. Friends speak the truth in love to you, and friends share mutual trust with you. Friends love and speak with kindness, and they also do not shy away from correction and saying hard things with the hope of sharpening the one they're speaking to. So many people say, well, I don't have that, or I can't find that, or you don't know how hard it is to find real friends. And all of those things can be true. So here is a question I want to pose to you. Have you ever been that kind of friend to someone else? Are you just looking for it for yourself, or have you been able to do these things for someone else? Do you accept people for who they are? Do you listen without judgment? Do you encourage friends to grow in the knowledge of themselves and of the Lord? Do you speak the truth in love? Do you trust others with your vulnerability? Because if you want friends like that, one of the steps towards it is to be a friend like that. It's the most famous idea in the Bible. Comes from the book of Leviticus. We've talked about it in the series before. It says, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai, which is love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. It is the end of a sentence that doesn't stand by itself in Leviticus. Yet it becomes the most basic understanding of the Torah, a sort of summary statement over the history of Jewish thought, to love your neighbor as yourself. The sage Hillel, who was years before Yeshua, in the end of the first century BCE and the beginning of the first century, he was asked to teach the entire Torah while standing on one foot. So Rabbi Hillel stood on one foot. I can't even do it. And he said, what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. Now go and learn. And Yeshua famously said similar, but the positive version of the same thing. He said, do to others as you would have them do to you. Or Yeshua's brother Jacob, which most people know as James. He was the leader of the followers of Yeshua in Jerusalem after the death and resurrection of his brother. Jacob said it this way. He said, if you fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, then you do well. Or Paul, the Pharisee, said in Galatians chapter 5, verse 14, he said, for the whole Torah can be summed up in a single saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Or one of the sages, Akiva, who was after the disciples, after Yeshua and after the apostles in the end of the first century and the beginning of the second century, he was once asked, what is the greatest principle in the Torah? And he answered, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha ze kalal gadol b'Torah. Love your neighbor as yourself is the greatest principle in the Torah. Again and again, the principle that shows up everywhere in Jewish history and in Jewish thought begins in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Adonai. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Why does it end with I am the Lord? Well, it's because this is what the Lord does by nature. He loves his creation as he loves himself. He instructs the Jewish people to do the same. A part of loving God is loving people. This is what godly friends do. We love each other as we love ourselves. So, how can you love your neighbor well if you don't love yourself? How can you support others if you never let anyone support you? Look, living wisely means you learn to love yourself at every age. All of the good and all of the bad, that is you. I think the reason why people struggle with friendship and being a good friend is because we have trouble separating the good from the bad in ourselves and in others. It goes back to the Garden of Eden and the tree of the knowledge of Tov and Ra, the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Once we had the knowledge of good and bad, we were introduced to pain and suffering and hurt and disappointment, rejection, and the like. And we weren't built for such things. Yet those things entered the world with the knowledge of Tov and Ra, the knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad. Look, we've all been hurt by friends. We've all had friendships that we thought would last forever and didn't. We have all let down friends, hurt friends. We've been let down by and we've been hurt by friends. My encouragement to you is don't let that keep you from friendships that will heal your heart and mind. Don't let past pain keep you from opening up to friendships that God sends your way. Henry Cloud, the Christian psychologist, talks about this in his book, Changes That Heal. And he talks about the ideal self and the real self. He says this. He says the ideal self is the one we imagine and we want to be. The real self is the one that we truly are, not the one we wish to be. And of course, the problem in the relationship between the ideal and the real is the ideal judges the real as unacceptable and brings down condemnation and wrath on the real. This sets up an adversarial relationship between the two. And like all adversaries, they just move further and further apart, the ideal and the real. Look, we all need to have a good relationship with ourselves. When the ideal and the real come into conflict with each other, we need to be able to extend grace and unconditional love and acceptance towards ourselves. So Henry Cloud says our good relationship involves holding on to the ideal and lovingly accepting the real. If the real is loved and accepted, it can be encouraged to grow towards the ideal. So Dr. Cloud writes that the Bible teaches two themes throughout. He talks about the first is that we're created in the image of God and we have incredible value. The second principle is that we're sinful and broken, and there is an ideal and also a real. Both are true, and both need to be reconciled into grace-giving relationship with God and with others. And as we do this work in ourselves, as we become friends with ourselves at every age. We can give grace to our real self when we did not live up to the ideal. Or worse, we totally failed as a person or a friend. We have to hold on to the tension of the good and the bad, the tov and the ra within us. So Henry Cloud says this. He says, if we do not have the ability to tolerate and deal with the simultaneous existence of good and bad, we cannot successfully deal with and live in this world. For the world and we are precisely that, good and bad, tov and ra. And the more we can hold the tension of both the tov and the ra, the good and the bad, within ourselves, the more we can hold the tension of the good and the bad in our friends and our neighbors. We push away people because of internal ideals rather than the reality of the good and the bad in everyone. Instead, we can draw near to people who are full of tov and ra. They're full of good and bad. And we can find grace, unconditional love, and acceptance for who they are and who they could be at the same time. So as we're talking about living wisely with friends, it's one of the unsung heroes of our faith in the Bible is Jonathan. He's the son of Saul, Israel's first king, and he was the crown prince of Israel, and he was the next in line for the throne of Israel. And Jonathan was somehow able to hold the tension of the good and the bad in his father Saul. Jonathan was somehow able to hold the tension of the good and the bad within himself. Jonathan was able to hold the tension of the good and the bad in David, who would be king, who was his friend. Jonathan seemed to be able to find grace, unconditional love, and acceptance for himself, for his father Saul, and for his friend David. And the friendship between Jonathan and David is probably the most famous friendship in the Bible. In modern times, many people have tried, there were so many articles I read online making the case that they were in a homosexual sexual relationship with each other. And of course, it's not true, and it confuses the real point of their friendship. You need a Jonathan in your life. You need someone who you don't have a sexual relationship with, who loves you with grace, unconditional love, and acceptance, who loves themselves and loves you as they love their self. You need someone who can love you like a brother or a sister. And men need a friend or friends that are men. Women need a friend or friends that are women. It's by design, and it's meant to complement the idea of marriage. You need people of the same sex who love you with grace, unconditional love, and acceptance, and who can love in return with grace, who you can love in return with grace, unconditional love, and acceptance. And sometimes it's just for a season in your life, and the friendship changes because of all kinds of different circumstances. And sometimes people find a friend for life, and sometimes people lose their greatest friends. It's the kind of relationship that you have with maybe you don't have with a lot of people. Most people have one or two really good friends over the course of their lives. Pew Research Center did a poll recently, and according to their research done in July of 2023, they found that a narrow majority of adults, 53% of adults in the United States, say that they have between 1 and 4 close friends, while a significant share, 38%, say they have 5 or more friends. But some 8% of people in the United States say that they have no close friends. And that 8% represents 26 million people who have no close friends. But see, before David shows up on the scene, Saul keeps breaking all the commandments of the Lord, and the Lord removes his kingdom and his legacy through the prophet Samuel, who was the one that anointed him to be king. And of course, this makes Saul anxious and paranoid for the rest of his time as the king of Israel. His son Jonathan is different. One could say he's the opposite of his father Saul. Jonathan knows that God has removed his father as king, and he recognizes that his friend David will be king in his place. And so after David defeats Goliath, Jonathan makes a covenant with David. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 1. Now it came to pass when David had finished speaking to Saul that Jonathan's soul was knit to David's, his nephesh was knit to David's nephesh, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Verse 3 says, then Jonathan cut a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. This phrase appears again for the third time in the narrative in 1 Samuel 20, verse 17. Jonathan made David swear again because of the love he had for he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. Saul tries to kill David many times. And he even tries to kill his own son, Jonathan, because he supports David. But Jonathan's friendship remains with David. And it's not just because they made a commitment to each other, but it's also because of Jonathan's commitment to the Lord. It's something his father Saul lost in his disobedience and pride in the story. Jonathan knew what the Lord wanted. Jonathan knew that David was anointed to be king and that he was not going to be king himself. And he could see that he understood what holding on to the throne with paranoia looked like in his father. And he knew not to go against the Lord. And then he asked David to remember his family forever. And eventually David does. After Jonathan dies, he finds his son Mephibosheth, if you're looking for a baby name. That's a good one. And he invites him to eat at his table. And he restores all of Saul's land to Jonathan's son because of their covenant. And David is able, after Jonathan's death, to love Jonathan's son as he loved himself. This is how friends are talked about by David's son, King Solomon, who wrote most of the Proverbs, who I'm sure had heard many stories about Jonathan, his father's greatest friend who died before he was born. Proverbs 18, verse 24. A man with many friends may be harmed by them, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Or Proverbs 17, verse 17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. That's what friends are for. You know, nobody talks about the real miracle of Yeshua's ministry. And the real miracle of Yeshua's ministry is that he was 30 and had 12 close friends. Well, at least he had 11. Okay, I mean, Peter and Thomas weren't actually great either, so maybe you could call it the 9. I mean, actually, for a time, they actually all abandoned him at his death. So anyway, it's hard to have friends, even for Jesus. Yeshua then said to his disciples, while they were all still his friends, in John chapter 15 and verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. And this, I think, hit me this week as I was preparing for this message, that I think Yeshua has Jonathan on his mind. I think a friend who gives his life for his neighbor is Jonathan, what Jonathan does for David. And you remember, David is the line that Yeshua is in, that Yeshua is a part of the line of David and the one who becomes the king on the throne of David. But none of that happens if Jonathan doesn't make a covenant with David of friendship. So Yeshua continues to his disciples and he says, you are my friends if you do what I command. I am no longer calling you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. I've called you friends because everything I have heard from my Father, I've made known to you. Yeshua considers you his friend. He gave everything, including his life, for his friends, so that you and I could love each other as he has loved us, that we could love your neighbor as yourself, so that what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor, or do to others as you would have them do to you, because this sums up the entire Torah and the prophets. How we love each other is an extension of how we love ourselves and how we love God. To care for the needs of others as you would want your needs to be cared for. You need that kind of friend. I need that kind of friend. I can be that kind of friend for other people. You can be that kind of friend for other people. We have to be open to who God calls us to be real, true friends with. We need to ask God, is this something you want me to be? Is this person someone you want me to be friends with? We can't do it for everyone. But I do think God calls us in seasons of our lives and times to be this kind of friend for people. As my friend Andy Stanley said so brilliantly in a message, he said it this way: do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Don't just look at it and go, well, I can't be that kind of friend for everyone, so I'm not going to be that kind of friend for anyone. No, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Because you can ask the Lord what friendships he's calling you to. You can, who is it that you can be a friend like Jonathan was to David? Who is the Lord calling you to stand with through all of the tov and ra, through all the good and bad? Who is standing with you through all the tov and the ra, the good and the bad? Who's helping you to hold the tension of all the tov and the ra, but of what is happening in the world around you? Friends, Yeshua loved you so much that he offered himself as a sacrifice for your sins. And he literally gave his life for his friends, just like Jonathan did for David. And Yeshua rose from the grave and defeated death so his friends could live with him forever. And you are his friend. If you're not, just ask him to be your friend. You may not believe it, but it's true at the same time. Because Yeshua holds the tension of all that is tov and ra in his creation. Yeshua holds the tension of all that is good and bad in you. And yet, he still calls you his friend. Remember, it's the definition of friendship that we started with. Friendship is a state of enduring affection, esteem, intimacy, and trust between two people. That is what Yeshua, our Messiah, desires with you. And as your friend, you have to understand that Yeshua accepts you for who you are, that he listens to you without judgment, that he encourages you to grow in the knowledge of yourself and of the Lord, that he speaks the truth in love to you, and that he shares mutual trust with you, and that Yeshua will provide friends to do the same for you. And he will give you everything you need to be this kind of friend for others. So that, because we can hold the tension of all the tov and the ra in ourselves, and all of the good and the bad in others, and not allow all the tov and the ra in this world to keep us from one of the greatest gifts that God has given humanity: friendship. So my encouragement to you, wherever you are, when it comes to friendship, especially those who are in need of this kind of friend now, here's what I want you to ask the Lord and to do. It is do for one what you wish you could do for everyone, and live wisely with friends. I love you guys, and I've so enjoyed going through Proverbs with you, and we are moving into a season as we prepare for the high holidays, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. We're going to have a series of messages leading up to those holidays, and then if you're in the Seattle area and you want a place to celebrate those holidays, seats are free. We have plenty, and we would love to see you in this season of repentance that we are beginning on the Jewish calendar. I love you guys. See you next week.